Welcome to this month's First Friday at the Fusion Studio. My name is Rich Dione. I'm the co-director of Purdue University's Fusion Studio for Entertainment and Engineering. We're here today, as we are most months, in the John Martinson Entertainment and Engineering Lab. I'm excited about this presentation today. I'm always excited about these. I say that every single time. But today we have Josh Grove from the Sphere. He's going to talk to us about what he's calling the road to the Sphere, the industry, and the importance of adaptability. I think we talked through some of the content earlier. It's going to be a really fun conversation. As Senior Vice President of Studio Core Technology at Sphere Entertainment Company, Josh oversees infrastructure that supports Sphere Studio's core technology functions. This includes architecting the digital pipeline from camera to screen, utilizing various software used to create content. His prior experience includes roles at the Walt Disney Studios and Sony Pictures Imageworks. Josh is a graduate of Purdue University, Boiler Up, with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering and Technology, with a focus on spatial animation. Before I let Josh get started, I'll say that he said earlier, he's comfortable with questions during his presentation. So if things come up while he's talking, giving his presentation, throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll find a moment to interrupt. And there'll be time for questions and answers at the end as well. So with that, Josh, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
We've been trying to connect with you for a while, and there's been a lot of things that have gotten in the way, but I'm excited to be able to chat with you today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I think this will be a very casual conversation. What I want to talk about is kind of my path, the evolution of the industry and technology in the industry, and much to the titles, the importance of adaptability. And then how I got to the Sphere, and then I'll kind of talk about the Sphere a little bit and some of the challenges that we faced putting this massive undertaking in order. So with that said, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Oh, PowerPoint. All right. Can everyone see that? We're good. Perfect. All right. So I'll talk about, start off just talking a little bit about myself and the path and how I got here. I like to say it's a very ADHD fueled path to, oh, that's nice and shiny. What's that do? I want to learn that. So to start off, I actually went to Ball State University first, and I was 9 credits away from graduating with a degree in psychology. And a friend of mine who I lived with at the time was big. He was getting into using Maya and After Effects and 3D motion graphics, etc. And so he gave me some software to play with. Not completely legal, but at the time, it was a different time then. It was a different time. But I started getting into that, and he was like, you should come to this conference called SIGGRAPH as a student volunteer. So that was in 2002. I went to my first SIGGRAPH, and I walked in and just mind was blown. There was Sony Imageworks actually had an event where they were showing the first images of the first Spider-Man, and I'm a huge comic book nerd. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a job? Like, people can do this? At that point, I went and I spoke with some representatives from Purdue that were at the show, and I transferred immediately. And that's how I ended up at Purdue with a degree in mechanical engineering and technology. So, after college, Indiana wasn't exactly the spot to make movies. That's what I always wanted to do. I wanted to make films. I worked at the Indy Star as their lead multimedia designer. And I got a call from my buddy that had loaned me that software. And he had recently moved to LA, and he was like, the studio I'm at has an opening. I think you should do it. You should come interview. So I flew out to LA, interviewed with this company, worst interview of my life. It was the person was looking at my reel, and it was just very, oh, this is mediocre. This isn't good. Okay. Little did I know they already knew they were going to hire me, but they were just messing with me. But I came out of that interview thinking, okay, I'm going to work at Indy Star for the rest of my life. Wonderful. Got a call a week later and ended up moving to Los Angeles with a timeline of a month to see if I could make it. And if not, I would be back to Indiana. So when I first came out to LA, I was working in at the time it was real-time sports graphics with the software called VizRT. I did primarily CBS Sports, Major League Baseball Network, all of the flying lower thirds, the stats. So it was a mixture of art, creative, as well as development to plug in statistics to these real-time graphics. While I was doing that, I started working small shots on visual effects films. Pardon me. And as I was working on these visual effects films, I started getting more into the concept of how does this thing work? When it gets to me, what has it gone through? And why does it take me so long to do these 30 monotonous steps? So I started kind of getting into the idea of development, taught myself Python, started writing my own scripts to automate a lot of the workflows that I was doing. And at that point, that's when I moved over to Sony Imageworks, and I was what they call a PST, a production services tech, over at Sony Pictures Imageworks. My first movie that I did was Alice in Wonderland, back in the Tim Burton joint. And a lot of what I did there was develop more scripts and automation to work and help the visual effects artists. So my background as a visual effects artist really helped me as a developer because I understood the tool set. I understood like the workflow of being the artist, what needed to happen. But during that time, I saw another, bright and shiny thing, and I thought, well, you know what? I love organizing. I love like connecting all the dots and making things happen. And I was like, I should be a producer. And so I went into being a coordinator over at Hydraulic Studios. Eventually made my way up to producer and realized very quickly that I just hated Excel and I wanted nothing to do with this career path. So as I was doing that at Hydraulics, I would also sneak over and do some visual effects shots sometimes, and just to keep myself up to date. But I had moved over to a studio, as a small studio that the old president of visual effects from Imageworks had started, called the Creative Cartel. And it was a very unique studio in the sense that we would be hired by the studios like Disney or Warner Brothers or Fox to oversee the entire process from camera to screen. And so that's the on-set, doing the dailies, the digital imaging, the visual effects, that whole workflow, and then the finishing process, color correction, and then final delivery to screen. So while I was at that company, I had this very new, unique, interesting viewpoint of the entire industry, which just fueled my ADHD more, where I was like, okay, I need to learn all of these things. So I had a very unique opportunity to be able to work on set, to work with the camera department, work with the DITs and follow that process from beginning to end. While I was doing that, I was also kind of, that same mindset of, I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over. I'm going to tell a computer to do it. So I started writing these tools to help automate the plate pull process from camera, the color correction process, dailies, the review process, and the visual effects delivery process. So once I kind of built this hodgepodge of tools, we realized that we had a product, and we released it I want to say 2007. And Disney picked it up, Warner Brothers, Fox, a lot of big studios were using it on their films. Um, Eventually, Technicolor acquired it, and yep, I see you're unmuted. What do we got?
Finish your thought.
Okay, so eventually Technicolor acquired it, and at that point, I had lost my baby. Um, I was then asked by Disney to come over and basically do the same thing. Um, so I'll pause there, and then any questions?
Well, I have one, and maybe it's just because I'm clueless about this stuff, right? But because I dabble in programming, that's part of my automation side of my brain. I have taught myself Python, and I learned Pascal way back in the
Oh
day.
yeah.
So like that was my start. But I'm fascinated by how someone who's first interested in sort of visual effects learns how to create code to interface with all of these other software tools to automate processes, right? Like I wouldn't know, I've done a good amount of coding, but I wouldn't know how to write code to talk to, I don't know, Adobe After Effects, or I'm going to make up a bunch of software that I don't know anything about, or Maya. Like how did you get into that? How did you learn that? And I know everybody wants to talk about the sphere, and we'll get there, but I think this is an interesting step along the path.
Yeah, no, so it was my first dabble in it was Mel scripting in Maya. Um,
Okay.
and that was me accidentally just clicking the button, being like, wait, what is this? What is this, Jim? Um,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
and it was just like, it was a lot of reading the manual, because back then it wasn't, you could Google things, but I don't think it was as rich as it is now. So
Right.
there wasn't like 10,000 video tutorials on how to script for visual effects. And in each time you would do this, you're kind of looking at a new problem. So it's not like, it's a very specific to this type of shot that I'm working on, or this type of production or film that I'm doing.
Hmm.
And so I just, it was a lot of trial and error. So it was a lot of just like, okay,
Sure.
well, I'm seeing that I'm doing this like 30 button clicks to do this one thing. Like there's got to be a way to tell this. And then once I found Mel scripting, that was kind of the introduction to the whole, like, and then that was the gateway drug to Python. And I tried C++, but not for me.
I
But
don't blame you.
yeah, but yeah, no, it was more of just like, and again, I think, excuse me, just the way my brain has always been wired is, I think well, this is going to sound terrible, but at the heart of me, I'm pretty lazy. So if I can tell a computer to do something instead of me having to do it, that seems like a better option.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, it was really just, it was trial and error, and it was just keep poking at it. And I think what was also really good for me is I had this amazing network from SIGGRAPH. Like I had met some of the most amazing,
Right.
VFX artists, or even people who created Maya. Like I knew some of the founders of Maya, and they were resources I could tap into and say, hey, I've got this problem. This is what I'm trying to do. Like, what's your advice? Or, and so I had a really good network of people I could tap into, as well as just, reading through the manual, figuring out, every nook and cranny to what I was doing.
Sure.
That's really, it kind of just evolved in a sense.
Yeah.
It was never something I sought out to do. It was just like, ooh, wait, what's this do?
Well, and I appreciate that a lot, and I think part of what is interesting about that to me is that I'm sure that I shouldn't say that. I suspect that, like in a computer science class or even a computer science major, no one's talking about learning programming for automation scripting for VFX, right? And I'm reasonably certain that nobody in a VFX program is learning about that there's an opportunity to figure out how to be the automation programmer for VFX. And so that there's clearly a rigorous and robust intersectional field at this weird
100%.
Venn diagram overlap, right? And I guess it's just interesting to me that, or reminds me that it's important for me as an instructor in this already intersectional space of engineering, technology, and entertainment to be mindful that even though I focus in certain ways, there are probably intersections that I haven't thought of that students will want to fall into. That's really, I don't know what to do with that, but I really appreciate how your career path has kind of highlighted the importance of thinking about that. So
Yeah, no,
thank you for
that's
that.
yeah, no, and I think that's a really, really good point. And it's interesting now too, because this is a very touchy subject with a lot of people in visual effects, but the introduction to AI into
Yeah,
the film and visual effects, like um, there's different ways to, to peel that onion. There's one of the ways to look at AI and the way that I've looked at it is it's just another tool to
right.
that's actually more accessible now to you don't have to know programming. I actually just got a message from one of my old bosses the other day who's not a programmer whatsoever. But he was like, I just used ChatGPT to write a denoising algorithm for, and it's just like, yeah, it's learning how to use the tool to
Right.
benefit. And I think that intersection is super important because it makes you more efficient as an artist. And then as a developer, it gives you a new mindset. It gives you kind of instead of thinking of that compartmentalized, I'm a computer science major, I just work on these lines of code and make things happen. It's like, oh, I can be creative with my development and my
Sure.
programming. And there's
Yeah.
a creative artistic side to what I'm doing. So that's kind of always what's interested me is like having both those worlds in my pocket where it's like, I can pick up Maya or After Effects and I can go nuts, but at the same time, having that tool set to make my job more efficient and easier is it's just getting easier. And I think it's super important
Yeah.
to keep
Yeah.
that in mind as you're approaching problems or trying to solve problems and whether it's programming or visual effects for the film industry.
Well, and I think there's a whole other conversation we could have about AI, but from my opinion, that's a genie that's out of the bottle, that's not
Yeah.
going back in. So we got to
Yeah.
deal with it. But I think what we're going to hear as you continue to talk about where you have ended up, it seems to me like that willingness to explore those weird intersectional spaces, particularly around scripting and automation and making your job as a visual effects artist easier, has led exactly to where you are. Like you couldn't be doing.
Yes.
We've already eaten up a bunch of time with my questions. I'm going to stop and let you continue. So back to you, and we'll let you continue.
Perfect. No, yeah, so I think 100% going back to what you just said, I think this kind of bouncing around mentality that I've had and, oh, look, squirrel kind of approach I've had to this industry is exactly what one drew me to the sphere when they told me about it, but also has made that a very interesting project and kind of, almost the perfect fit for me in my career path. So yeah, I spent some time at Disney. Um, Learned very quickly that working in a corporate environment was different than a rough and tough visual effects studio. Um, so I spent 3 years there, worked on some pretty fun films. Um, and then at that point, I was just kind of done. I was burnt out from making movies. It's not all roses. It can be a very frustrating and rigorous career. So a friend of mine had started a startup for AI, early days AI on kind of visual asset tagging. Um, and I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun. Why not? So I went and did that, got out of the industry. I was extremely happy and relaxed, slept well at night, actually slept. Um, did that for a few years. And then I got a call back, well, God, it's been 5 years at this point, about 5 years ago. And they were like, hey, we're MSG, Madison Square Garden. We're trying to build this thing called the Sphere. And, this is what we're thinking. This is kind of our vision. And I was like, that sounds impossible. I'm in. Let's do it. And it sucked me right back into the industry. But it was, the early days. I think I was telling Rich earlier, I was like the fifth or sixth employee that came on board in the LA studio when they started it. The building wasn't even built yet. And when all of us met on that soundstage, it was very much a, so how are we going to do this? Because we're facing a new set of challenges, and it, you had a ragtag group of misfit geniuses that came from all over the industry, from live theater to live events to visual effects to audio engineering, network engineering. Like, it was this crew of people that, looking at the scale of what was trying to be done, we had no idea where to start. So it really, the first, I would say, year, 2 years was just full R&D. It was fail fast, fail hard, back to the drawing board, let's figure it out. And you don't know what you don't know until it slaps you in the face and causes a big issue. So it was a lot of trial and error, and as we would go along, new challenges would present themselves, because the building wasn't even up yet. So there was no way for us to go visually test it and view it or understand like what was the actual plane we're working with. It was all just conceptual, which was very, very frustrating, but it was also very exciting because it was something that was like, this has never been done before. There's no manual on how we do this. We can take our base knowledge of what we've learned throughout the industry in our different perspective areas, but that only gets us so far with this project. So, we had a good foundation, but then from that foundation, we just had to keep adapting and evolving, and it's been a very exciting project. One of the things that's the kind of a fun talking point is that the year that we opened, the venue, we had not been in the venue. We had been working on the film Postcards from Earth for over a year. And we had like a little test facility. It wasn't Big Dome yet. The venue, we couldn't actually get into the venue to see our work until a week before it opened. And so it was like, I hope we got this right, because there's no way we're fixing this in a week. But that was just kind of that was the whole project, was this just like run and gun mentality. And it was a lot of fun. And it was the culmination of everything that I had done in my career, all coming into one space and being able to collaborate and work with all these amazing people. So I want to talk a little bit about just the scale of the sphere to give you some numbers. So it is the largest spherical building in the world, 875,000 square feet. The inside fits 17,600 or so people. It is a 160,000 square foot LED screen that wraps around the front and over the top and to the sides, with a resolution of 16,000 by 16,000, essentially 16K. It is 64,000 LED panels with over 268 million pixels. So, coming from a world where at the time we had gone as high as maybe 8K. Part of my journeys I did, I think my first 8K project was a Foo Fighters music video, and that was a bear. So thinking about 16K was just a whole other challenge of, it was just, we couldn't fathom the scale of that yet. The outside is the what we call the exosphere. It's 580,000 square foot full wraparound dome. And it's got 1.23 million pucks, which are these little LED diodes that fit all around, with a resolution of 8K. So it's not as high as the inside, but still 8K, and it's pretty impressive. Now, the audio, I think, is what is one of the most fascinating parts of this, and I'm not an audio engineer, so I can't really give it much justice. But the audio system is Holoplot, which is a company out of Germany that we partnered with. it's a 1600 matrix array speaker setup with beamforming technology. And what that means is we have full X, Y, and Z access control of where the audio points to and hits at every seat in the house. So, we do a lot of live concert experiences. Every seat you sit in, no matter where you're at, has the same audio experience. We can also do things where we can animate that sound. We did a test early days called the Whisper, which was super creepy. But essentially, you could have a person sitting in seat A and a person sitting in seat B, and we could beamform audio to seat A in full English, seat B in full German, and there's no bleed of audio. So we have full control over all the channels, all of the spatial awareness of the sound. But the Whisper test was we were testing what was the threshold, and you would get a whisper in this ear and then in this ear, and it was disturbing on many levels. But it showed the power of what we could do with just the audio alone. So when you're thinking now in a full-scale production, coming from the visual effects world, I was mostly just concerned with the visual assets. Now, it's a new way of telling a story in the sense that not only is the visual assets, high 16K resolution, completely stunning, but the audio now plays a part, and you can play with that audio, you can animate with that audio. We also have 4D technology inside the Sphere. We have haptic seating, as well as sense, winds, hot air, cold air. So you have that whole effect as well. So when we were shooting Postcards from Earth, that was one of the things that we were keeping in mind, from camera, starting at camera, when we shoot the shot, I kind of equate it to the California Soarin' ride at Disneyland, where you would fly over the orange field and smell the oranges. But those are some of the things that we started thinking about, but at a much larger scale. When that elephant stomps by, you feel it in the seat, you feel the elephant stomps. And so that's a marriage between not only the visual assets, but the audio assets and the haptic, and how we control and merge all those together is, it's an army of, again, geniuses that put this together. But that kind of gives you the scale of what we're looking at, and we stepped into and was like, how are we going to do this? When we first started, we were sending out an array camera that had, there was 8 red cameras in an array, all kind of, stitched together. And we would go shoot these very wide angle, wide shot at 8K, basically. And the problem with that was, from a production standpoint, from a timeline standpoint, to stitch that for a screen of this size was a complete and utter nightmare. It was we started branching into AI to see if there was some way that we could use AI, but based on the scale and the angle of what was being captured, there was always anomalies, and there was, even the cleanup process would just take weeks. So we decided to just build our own camera. And so this effort was led by a colleague of mine who actually used to run Red cameras. And we invented the Big Sky camera. This is the 316 megapixel sensor, 120 frames per second at 18K resolution. Now, when we're looking at the data rate, we're looking at 30 gigabytes a second at 60 frames per second, and 50 gigabytes a second at 120 frames per second. The camera itself has a network throughput of 600 gigabytes a second. This thing is a monster. Now, with that said, the introduction of the Big Sky camera has now introduced a whole new set of problems and things that we have to solve and find solutions for. So when it comes to the pipeline, and that's a lot of, when I came on board, that's been my main focus, is the pipeline from camera to screen and how all of those things marry together. The data size of the Big Sky camera is, you're looking at 32 terabytes is 15 minutes of footage. So when we had Fish doing some shows last year, we filmed a Fish show with 4 big sky cameras. The entire show, that data footprint was over 6 petabytes of just raw camera footage. So you can imagine, like, now we've got a massive storage issue to solve. So looking at the pipeline, not only did we have to think about building a VFX pipeline at a massive scale and understanding how do we move data, like of file sizes of this caliber, this size, through a network efficiently, so you're not taking 4 days just to receive a file to work on it. So this was a lot of partnership with, one of the interesting challenges, and this was a partnership with MSG Corporate. One of the interesting challenges was the original network bandwidth that we had to work with was built for a corporate, Microsoft place, not a visual effects studio, not at 16K resolution. So there was a lot of reinvention of the wheel there, and there was a lot of, not only how do we move data to artists in production and get them to work on that, but then there's also how do we get it to the screen? How do we get it to this massive, 160,000 square foot screen? So the way we've done that is we have the largest ST2110 network in the world. It's basically a network protocol allowing us to transfer large scale file sizes and images at extremely fast data rates. We are, and I can't go into the specifics of that setup, but we are essentially streaming in real time 16K footage to the screen at the same time running full redundancy, so that if that one network path goes down, there is no blip. It just picks up on the secondary redundant network path, and no one's the wiser. So this is like when we're looking at file optimization and networking limitations. These are the things that as we're leading up to this. Oh, we've got to stream this 16K in real time. Then we need to build these files in a way that's fully optimized. So, it wasn't as easy as just thinking about, oh, we'll just compress some files, because from an imaging standpoint, when you compress files, you add the degradation, and that degradation is going to be seen on a 160,000 square foot screen. So we had to have completely lossless, just pristine images, but at a file that was optimizable, as well as a networking protocol that could handle that. To get there, it was a lot of work with the ST2110 people. Outside, we had a lot of help from the outside as well to kind of come up with all this. But these are some of the things that when we were jumping into it, we had to think about. And then the storage challenges alone, like I told you, like right now I think we currently have over 45 petabytes, which only 10 petabytes of that is archive. So not cost effective from an on-prem storage solution. So we're looking at ways now for the future of how do we make this a more flexible pipeline in the cloud. Again, data sizes are massive, so it's an effort from a cost perspective that we have to be fully optimized on how we think about storage protocols and processes, because it can't be as simple as just throw it in an archive or a cold storage bucket and let it sit, because we're talking about petabytes of data that costs an exuberant amount of money. So it's been the project itself has been just for me, a learning experience from like all assets of the pipeline, and into some areas that I even didn't know existed nor did want to know about. But it's been a very, very enlightening project. Super proud of what we did. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to see it. It is remarkable. It's when we're in the studio and we're just like heads down grinding, it's easy to lose sight, and then you go over and you see it and you're like, oh God, this is this is what we did. This is why I'm doing this. But yeah, that's a lot of kind of as much as I can tell about the sphere, um, obviously. But if there's any questions, happy to answer some questions. And
Josh, thank you for this, and I appreciate you sharing what you can. I recognize, and I hope everybody who's watching recognizes that there's, of course, a lot of proprietary information that can't be disclosed. Um, so I appreciate you sharing what you've been able to share. I've got lots of things that are popping in my head about what you've talked about. And if there are no questions from the group, I'll just continue to ask my questions. But please, again, if you're watching, throw up some thoughts or comments in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll throw them Josh's way. One of the last things I found myself thinking about as you were talking, especially in terms of the data storage question, we're hearing a lot about um, the ecological impact of data centers, right? And this has nothing to do with your job. Like you don't deal with that part of it, but it just I guess I'm just recognizing that as the the thirst for more immersive, experiential kinds of events and venues continues to grow, and as we continue to explore these things, these technologies, and push the edge of these technologies, um, that that ecological impact may become a thing we have to think about more and more. Did you guys talk about that? Have you thought about that? No shame if you haven't, but I'm just curious.
no, we definitely we have, because when I was one of the things that I had brought up earlier is that if the data footprint alone is just bonkers. So from starting off with just the cost perspective of owning all that storage and housing that in a data center somewhere downtown, it's just not doable. So
Right.
it's definitely things that it is on the Sphere's roadmap of things to address. Um, I I've thought about it personally in the sense of, this is a lot of stuff. This is costing a lot of
Hmm.
power. And
Yeah.
looking at it from a price perspective when I'm doing my budget,
Yeah.
but it makes sense all around, in the sense that, yeah, like it's, as we see, well, my hope is that as we see these immersive experiences more and more coming to fruition, that we get to a point where there's the file optimization side of it for storage becomes much greater. And I'm already seeing things that
Yeah. Yeah.
NVIDIA is doing that are remarkable. So it definitely is a concern, and I think
Yeah.
one of the missions with Sphere, I know, is we're looking at putting in a whole solar network to power the Sphere.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
there's definitely these initiatives are 100% on the mindset, um, and there's a whole team that's focused on that. But
Yeah.
it's a real concern, because it is and you look at when people talk about the cloud, and well, it's like, oh, just put it in the cloud, but all the cloud is just a data center somewhere else. You're just
Right.
renting someone else's stuff. Um, so it definitely is a concern, and I think, again, I think we have to hope that the technology gets more advanced, that you know it
Sure.
it doesn't require to have file sizes at you know 32 gigs a second frame rate. So but yeah, no,
Yeah. I mean, you're right. We're gonna get better at that stuff, right?
yeah,
I'm remembering I was in college in the mid 90s. We had a performing arts center at the small liberal arts college I was at, and they were getting a brand new mixing console for the performing arts center, and we couldn't wrap our heads around how they were using an Ethernet connection, a network connection, to pipe the audio from the mics on stage back to the console. We're like, there's no way. You can't shove that much audio down was probably not even a 10 gig per second
right.
network pipe. There's no way. It's going to be horrible. It's going to sound horrible. It didn't. It was great. We figured it out. Lossless compression technologies and all of that. We're moving in that direction
Yeah,
still. So, the things that you're talking about now as these big file sizes in in 15 years, people will laugh at and go, well, we can do that much smaller. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But it's still a question, right? Like, how do we deal with it now? And I think the flip side of that is, again, I don't know that I don't know how clear it is to up and coming technologists and entertainment technicians that that's a whole thing you could do, right? If you love math and you
Yeah.
love computer science and you love visual effects, you could spend your whole career developing new lossless file optimization technologies, right?
Yeah.
Like that's amazing to me.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about that enough. And I wonder, a related question that I often have is how much do we need to talk more about data communications, data networking in the entertainment in education, in entertainment education? How much of that was part of your schooling, right? Because you were a psychology major, so definitely
Yeah.
probably not in
Not
that.
there.
And then MET, mechanical engineering technology. And for those who don't know, can you talk about what that was and then what the overlap is?
Yeah, no, so my focus was spatial animation. So a lot of um, the MET program, for the most part, what I was doing was more focused on the creative side. So
Mm,
none of these were all foreign terms to me. Like I didn't know network. I didn't understand other than like,
sure.
going from dial-up modem to, 56K to, that was my extent back in the day. So the MET program was the spatial animation focus was more of the creative design kind of focus. So no, we never really got into any of that. Like there wasn't even programming in my path
Wow.
during MET. Um,
Yeah.
it was very, very creative driven. Um, but yeah. So that's it. And what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
Well, I was just sort of curious, like how much exposure you had to
Oh,
that sort of data side as part of your education. It sounds like not much.
not much at all. And I would say the sphere, I got into it a little bit during the Joust days when I was writing that software for the film studios. It was because it was a hardware software solution. So I had to understand networking and file transfers. And so that was kind of my leak into it. But then the sphere that's been a whole new learning experience. And like learning about the SD2110 network is one of the most bonker things I've ever seen in my life. Like it just things I didn't even know were possible. So yeah, my exposure was very little until I stepped into this world. Because again, I was more
Sure.
focused on the creative side.
Yeah, yeah. So, how much do you get to activate that creative side of your brain now in the job that you have? Right, because it sounds like you're now deeply embedded in all of this technology piece, right? Working on figuring out the pipeline and the way to move the data around. How much do you still get to be creative?
Um, from I think just because of my background in like color science and dailies and finishing, I still get to be a little creative in the sense that I go to the visual effects reviews and I still have that eye where I can point things out or I can see issues with the lenses or if there's any like fall off or lighting problems or color problems. Like I still get to like engage that part of my brain.
Yeah.
But for the most part, yeah, it's been a very heavy technology focus.
And how, if it does, maybe it doesn't, but how or does your background in that creative space inform the work that you do now? It must, right? In some way, your
Um,
knowledge of the creative choices and the creative needs must inform. Can you talk about that?
yeah. So I think my background as a visual effects artist definitely helps because I understand the process, the workflow that the artist has to go through to get there. So you look at it from not only the perspective of just writing tools to move things around efficiently, but a lot of my job also gets into how do I write tools or how do I architect tools for the softwares themselves to make their jobs the artist jobs easier. So we're constantly writing plugins or, different tool sets to integrate into Maya or, Unreal, et cetera. So it's still, yeah, very much still still very fuels the decisions I make from a
Yeah.
technology standpoint, because I just I'm more in line with the artist. I understand what they're asking
Yeah.
for. 'Cause it's
Yeah.
interesting to watch an artist talk to one of my just hardcore developers, probably one of the best developers I've ever met. But seeing that interaction, it's like there's not something communicating here correctly. So being able to
Uh-huh.
understand,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I get what you're saying because you need to do X, Y, and Z. So like having that forward thinking instead of just looking at it as almost a math problem in a developer perspective,
Hmm.
I can look at it from a creative perspective and understand what the overall output is when they're trying to
Sure.
get things done.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. So I teach undergraduate engineers with an emphasis in theater, and graduate technical direction students who all basically go on to become project managers or technical designers, right? And one of the things we talk about often is a big chunk of those jobs are all about just vocabulary and developing a shared vocabulary and being able to hear what this artist is saying and
Mhm.
understand how to translate that into the language that an engineer or a developer or a programmer can understand, right?
Exactly.
I'm teaching a mechanical design class right now, and one of the things I keep saying to the students is no director or set designer ever is going to understand what 4 feet per second means, or what, zero point 0.1 feet per second squared acceleration means. They can't visualize that, and so you got to figure out a way to navigate that. And it sounds like that's become a big part of your job now, is
Uh,
walking through that.
100%. And then, when I hire people, my team is definitely comprised of artists who've turned technical directors, who've turned developer, as well
Hmm.
as just hardcore Brainiac developers that are just brilliant at
Sure.
getting things done. So, because you have to have that translation. So it's and watching the two worlds kind of collide is something it's very interesting to watch, because I think they both sides of the brain learn from each other in a sense. But yeah. So it's when I'm hiring people, it's a focus that it's like, okay, I need more of an artist mind developer, and I need, it's definitely critical in what we're doing, especially because
Yeah.
the sphere it's one large suit. It's like everything under one roof. You have
Yeah.
to have like communication. I think something you just said is critical, and making sure that
Yeah.
the translation is happening, in order to build the right product and not have to keep going back to the drawing board. It is
Sure.
super critical.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're already at only 7 minutes left. 1 hour is not nearly enough time. There's time to get a question up on the chat if you have one in the audience. We were talking earlier about a bunch of stuff that we're not even going to have time to talk about now. Everything from when we were chatting before this. I love your description of the group that came together to begin this, right? That sort of ragtag group of misfit
Yeah.
folks, and we were talking about how um, that's kind of how these big innovative things happen, right? And I guess I just love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, like sort of facing
Yeah.
the unknown.
It was because the challenge was, again, like we knew foundationally how to make a movie, but then you add in all these elements, from the audio to the 4D to just the mere scale and structure. So it was a lot of just I don't know, in the beginning, and there was nothing. We couldn't Google anything. There was no way to Google it. Like, we didn't know what questions to ask yet until we started. And so, that it was definitely a very iterative process. And again,
Yeah.
the team that we originally, the team that I work with, period, is just amazing. And having all of these different inputs would be good and bad sometimes, because we would have what we'd call fireside chats, and it would be like what should have been a 30-minute conversation about naming conventions turned into a 4-hour long meeting about, and it was just like all these different perspectives coming in. You're like, well, that
Yeah.
that kind of makes sense, but no, that's totally, like, that's not how it's been done. And it was keeping that that process in that mindset in the back of our head of like, well, this is the way it's always been done. Like that's not
Uh-huh.
something we could think about. Like, doesn't matter. Like if it's the way it's always been done, that doesn't work here. So
Yeah.
so it was very much, yeah, like I said, the input from all angles was just amazing and brilliant to see that melting pot of knowledge. But at the same time, it was just like there was times where you're just like, okay, like someone just make a decision because this is this 4 hour long meeting about naming conventions has got to stop. But that was kind
We
of
got
the
to
fun
move on.
part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's so true, right? Like even the naming conventions are a thing that need to be figured out and are
Yeah.
complicated. We got a question from Jeff. Are there unique technical challenges that have come up with a new sphere happening in the Middle East?
Um,
Anything like technically unique that's come up?
I would say the for the most part, foundationally, no. I think what we tried to do when we built the pipeline and the infrastructure was um, make it as adaptable as possible and a puzzle piece as possible. So it's not like if we pull one part of the piece out, the whole thing doesn't crumble. So we can
Hmm.
easily like move and adjust and optimize certain things. With it being in Abu Dhabi, I think our biggest challenge is going to be just the networking, the transfer, and how we move data efficiently. Um, and I think that's kind of why we're looking at cloud providers to kind of help us with some of that. But
Yeah.
to the point there too is like it only goes as fast as the data center allows it. So if there's a data center right next door to the sphere, we're in luck. But if not, like there's challenges there where you have to figure out and it comes down to kind of policy and protocols too with the studio of, well, okay, maybe we don't send all the 16K footage all the time. Maybe we just send 8K for reviews and then 16K on final delivery. So there's things that you
Sure.
have to like not only technical problems, but just kind of policy and procedure problems that you have to figure out. But I think from a display audio technical standpoint, I think we're pretty comfortable with what we've built. There's always going to be changes. We're always going to be evolving. But yeah, no, I think the networking is going to be that's going to be a thing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. We were talking earlier about the evolutions of networking and computing from sort of centralized mainframe and distributed terminals to distributed compute. Like we're sort of going through a cycle of this again, it sounds like, because it's probably much easier to push the user interface commands for the manipulation of the files through a data network than it is to push the 16K file every time you
Totally.
want to do something, right? So that's really fascinating to me. We have about a minute or so left. I don't know that you can share anything about this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, what exciting new technologies or things can you tease or talk about that
Mm.
you're looking at, or maybe more vaguely, what are you predicting are going to be some new exciting things in the space of immersive video in the future?
Well, I don't know
I
what.
totally put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I don't know what I can talk about, but I think from a kind of just an overall perspective, I think one of the things that Sphere did was kind of unlock that intrigue of bringing people together and experience, almost like being in VR without the VR headset. And that was
Hmm.
kind of the overall vision in the beginning. I know there's projects popping up in Saudi Arabia called the Cube, which is
Hmm.
it's I think it'll fit like 9 Empire State Buildings inside, but it's kind of the
Oh my
same
God.
immersive experience. So I think we've kind of we've poked the bear a little bit, and I think um, I think from a sphere perspective, we'll see more spheres pop up. But some of the things to think about is maybe that not all the spheres are massive, 560,000 square foot domes. It's more smaller, intimate venues. And I think
Mm.
you've got
Oh
companies
yeah.
like Cosm. I don't know if you're aware of Cosm, um,
Mm.
but it's an immersive venue that's kind of doing small, very sports centered, but they're doing small
Gotcha.
small installations. And so I think we're going to see these type of things pop up because I think, we started building this, during the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, and I think there was a craving to be social again after the pandemic ended, and being able to experience things like this in the sphere, I think it's, I haven't heard a bad complaint yet. So yeah, I think we'll see more. But
Awesome.
yeah,
That's great. Again, there's probably not much more you could tell us about details there. So, but I appreciate that perspective that you think we're going to see more of this, and that it might move to a more intimate kind of approach. And certainly as technology prices come down and the technology complexities get figured out, that's kind of a cool, exciting idea. We are definitely at time, so we'll sort of wrap up here. Josh, thank you so much for this. This was exciting. There's so much cool information. I have been determined to go to the Sphere already, but now I'm doubly so, especially now that I have some things that I know about the technology that I can bring to my experience. This is our last First Friday for this academic year. We'll be back again in the fall, so keep your eyes open, folks, on our website and social media for more information about that. If you haven't yet registered for the symposium on education and entertainment and engineering, Rachel is going to put the link for that in the chat. I think we've got a really exciting agenda set up for folks to experience. We hope to see you there. And I think that's it. So thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you all next time.